We all think that we know how to think and know how to do it well. The 3rd century Neoplatonist philosopher Porphyry defined what it is to be human as being a rational animal. To be logical, he thought, is just a part of our being. It is who we are. That view was the cornerstone of the movement we call the Enlightenment. And it gave us much of the cultural infrastructure we take for granted today. Why do we have elections? Because if 2 competitors make their strongest arguments before the public, the voters, being rational animals, will select the better candidate for office. Why do we have juries? Because if you take any 12 random people, tell them all the facts of the case, present them with competing arguments for guilt and innocence, the members of the jury, being rational animals, will determine the truth of the matter. Why do we have marketplaces? Because when presented with competing goods at a variety of prices, consumers, being rational animals, will always choose to buy the best product at a fair price. We've arranged our entire civil society around the idea that we are logical beings, naturally capable of rational thought. We want freedom and liberty because we know what's best for us. We don't need to be told. We just need to be released to live according to our own good sense. Unfortunately, the world's a bit more complex. In the same way that there are optical illusions, images that'll trick our senses into thinking they perceive something they do not, there are what we might term cognitive illusions. That is, ways of thinking that convince us we're right about something we believe when we are, in fact, completely wrong. Contrary to our beliefs, we're not wired to be completely rational. Indeed, there are multiple factors leading us to be irrational. Some of these are psychological, some of them are sociological, and some of them are cultural. But understanding that they're out there is the first step to realizing that we need to think carefully about thinking carefully and to teach ourselves how to think in ways that are the most likely to avoid errors. One of the more well-known examples of being led to irrational belief comes from psychologist Solomon Asch's experiments in the early 1950s on conformity. Asch was a professor at Swarthmore who ran a series of experiments. The subject of the experiment would sit at a table with several other people he was told were also participating in the experiment, but, unbeknownst to him, were really Confederates working with the experimenter. Now, it was explained that this was a study in perception and that they would be shown a series of charts with different length line segments labeled A, B, and C, and they just needed to say which one was the same length as a 4th line next to them. Simple enough task. The table was arranged so that the subject would answer last, after the others said aloud which line they thought was the same size as the comparison line. The first chart was shown, and all of the Confederates answered correctly, and so did the test subject. Same for the next chart. But then, on the 3rd try, the Confederates all gave what was obviously the wrong answer. C was the same size as the comparison line, but they all said A. When it got to the test subject's turn, 12 out of 18 times in the original study, and it's been reconfirmed many times since, the test subject gave the wrong answer so as not to stick out. Not conforming with the group is something we fear, and we do things we know are wrong in order to get along with the majority. What Asch shows is interesting, that we'll act in such a way as to do something contrary to our reasonable beliefs. But the people who gave the wrong answer to fit in knew it was wrong, right? Well, that's where it gets interesting. Interviewed after the fact, most said, yeah, I knew it was wrong, but I didn't want to embarrass myself or mess up the researchers' data by being different. But then there were others who, more interestingly, said, because the task was so easy, and because the others answered so quickly and confidently, they started to doubt themselves. We can't all be right since we disagree. Since they all seem to agree with one another, I must be wrong. Asch's study was about what people would do, whether they would be willing to act in a way that they knew was wrong. But what came out was, in some cases, it wasn't just about their actions, but about their thoughts, about the way in which humans will change what we believe in order to fit in with those in our environment. This is what psychologist Irving Janis called groupthink. Groupthink occurs when we sacrifice our own critical capacities of thought in order to adopt a consensus belief. All other things being equal, we would not have come to hold this particular belief, but because we're in a group that believes it, we do too. It's not just that we act as if we believe it, we do believe it. Janis, Ash, and a couple generations of researchers following them have documented all sorts of factors that amplify or diminish groupthink. If those around you are unified in expressing the belief and do so passionately, you're more likely to get swept up in it. But if even one person expresses skepticism, you're more likely to be skeptical yourself. If there's a strong charismatic leader espousing the view, people are more likely to come to believe it. If there are rewards for believing or punishments for disbelieving, people will respond. Our beliefs are affected by the beliefs, actions, and personalities of those around us, even if they violate what we otherwise know to be good reasoning. Documenting this has become the task of social psychology. And these researchers have documented many ways that we naturally reason badly, what they call cognitive biases. Many cognitive biases have been discovered and replicated in multiple experiments. Some involve behaviors, effects like hyperbolic discounting, where we will irrationally choose less of a reward now instead of delaying gratification for more of a reward later, even if the greater reward is absolutely certain to be granted. Or there's what's come to be known as irrational escalation effect, where we'll judge an action less risky than we know it is because we've already invested in it. These are the throwing good money after bad instances where we've already put in so much time, money, or energy into something that we're unable to extricate ourselves from the situation, even when we know full well that it would be the rational thing to do. So, Porphyry and the Enlightenment thinkers' view of humans as purely rational beings turns out not to be true. Our ultimate interest in cognitive biases involves the ways in which we are innately wired to acquire false beliefs. We know that we act contrary to what we know to be rational, but just as interesting, or even more so, are the ways in which we are regularly wrong about what is rational. Now, researchers Ralph Raber and Norbert Schwartz have shown that the font of a sentence will have a measurable effect on how likely we think it is true. The clearer the words are visually, the more stock we put in their truth. If it's easier to read, turns out it's easier to swallow.